Yo, what is good to YouTube? We got a quick little video here, man. We got the worst military deaths ever, bro.
During the Gulf War in
Let's see
1991,
what they talking about, bro. I don't know.
tank battles
It's been some crazy military deaths, bro. I don't know how we can compile the words. Like, it's some deaths we don't even know happened, bro.
raged across the deserts of Iraq and Kuwait. It was the first time many American soldiers saw how fragile a tank could become once modern weapons struck its armor. To outsiders, a tank looked invincible.
RPGs,
Steel
bro.
walls, heavy guns, endless firepower. But inside, the crew was packed tightly together, surrounded by fuel and ammunition. A single hit could turn it into a death trap.
On
one scorching afternoon, a U.S. unit engaged a column of Iraqi T-72 tanks. These Soviet-built machines were powerful, but their design left one terrible weakness. The ammunition was stored openly inside the crew compartment. If a shell or missile penetrated the armor, it ignited everything at once. Soldiers called it the jack-in-the-box effect. The entire turret would blast into the sky, throwing the crew's remains with it. One Iraqi tank was hit directly by an American round. The explosion didn't kill the crew immediately. Instead, fire tore through the compartment, overwhelming the men inside. Witnesses later recalled that the gunner was still alive, desperately trying to force open his hatch. The flames spread over his body as he screamed for help, but the steel expanded with the heat, jamming the mechanism. From the outside, American soldiers could hear his cries, but could do nothing. For several long minutes, the man fought against the flames, pounding at the hatch while smoke poured from every opening. Then, the ammunition inside began to cook off. Shell after shell exploded in rapid succession, until finally, the entire turret blew free from the hull in a massive fireball. The tank was gone, and so was everyone inside. To the soldiers who witnessed it, the memory never faded. The image of a man trapped in a steel coffin, burning alive just inches from freedom, haunted them long after the war ended. The incident later revealed that even the strongest armor could turn against its crew. And online, our own defenses can fail just as quickly. I found this out the hard way when I searched anyone your process bit off. I detected online. It alerts you if and includes space insurance. It's Aura. 2 weeks detected for incident training exercise. On the morning of April 19, 1989, the USS Iowa was conducting training exercises off the coast of Puerto Rico. The battleship was one of the largest in the U.S. Navy, armed with massive 16-inch guns that could fire shells weighing nearly a ton. Each turret was a steel fortress of its own, 3 stories tall, with narrow ladders, ammunition hoists, and cramped compartments. That morning, Turret 2 was fully manned with 47 sailors. Their job was to prepare the guns for firing. It was dangerous but routine work, ramming powder bags into the breech, stacking shells in the hoists, sealing the heavy doors. Once the sequence started, escape was impossible. At 9:55 a.m., something went horribly wrong. As the crew was loading powder into the center gun, an explosion ripped through the turret. In an instant, a wall of fire tore across the chamber. The shockwave slammed against steel bulkheads. Men near the initial blast died instantly, but others were deeper inside the turret, trapped in compartments with no way out. Witnesses on the deck later said they could hear faint voices over the intercom, panicked screams, desperate shouts for help, before the system cut off. Inside, the temperature skyrocketed to over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire sucked the oxygen out of the air, turning the turret into a sealed furnace. On deck, sailors rushed to the scene. Black smoke was pouring from every vent. They tried to open the hatches, but the steel was too hot to touch, and the locks were jammed from the pressure inside. They could only stand helplessly as their friends died just feet away. Within minutes, the screams went silent. The fire raged until it consumed all the oxygen left in the turret. By the time rescue crews managed to break inside, it was too late. All 47 sailors were dead. The official report reduced it to a sterile line. An explosion occurred in Turret 2, the USS Forrestal fire. On July 29, 1967, the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal was stationed off the coast of Vietnam. The ship carried more than 5,000 men and nearly 100 combat aircraft, each armed and fueled, ready to launch. To the crew, it was just another day of operations. Jets lined up on deck, pilots strapped into their cockpits, engines roaring in the humid air. At 10:50 a.m., everything changed. A malfunction caused a rocket to fire from one of the jets parked on deck. The missile shot across the carrier and slammed into another aircraft loaded with fuel tanks and bombs. In an instant, the deck erupted in flames. The fire spread at terrifying speed. Jets were parked side by side, each filled with fuel. Pilots inside their cockpits were suddenly trapped as fire raced over the deck. Some never even had a chance to unstrap. Witnesses later said they saw men beating on the canopy glass, trying to escape as the flames consumed their planes. The heat reached over 1,000 degrees in seconds. Bombs began to cook off, exploding one after another. Each blast hurled shrapnel across the deck and ripped through sailors who were trying desperately to fight the fire. Survivors recalled seeing bodies hurled into the air, while others were engulfed in burning jet fuel that clung to skin and uniforms. One of the worst sights was of pilots sealed inside their jets. Some burned alive in their seats, their screams carried over the ship's loudspeakers as radios crackled with desperate voices. Firefighting crews tried to reach them, dragging hoses across the deck, but every new explosion pushed them back. The flames were unstoppable. It took hours to bring the fire under control. When it was finally over, 134 men were dead, and more than 160 were badly injured. The deck was littered with burned-out aircraft, twisted metal, and the blackened remains of men who never had a chance to escape. The Navy later called it one of the worst disasters in its history. The Kursk submarine incident. On August 12, 2000, the Russian nuclear submarine Kursk was participating in a major naval exercise in the Barents Sea. The submarine carried 24 torpedoes and was manned by 118 sailors. At 11:28 a.m., a torpedo malfunctioned in the forward compartment and exploded. 2 minutes later, a much larger blast followed, caused by other torpedoes igniting. The explosions were powerful enough to register on seismic sensors hundreds of miles away. Most of the men on board were killed instantly, but not all of them. In the aft section of the submarine, behind sealed bulkheads, 23 sailors survived the initial explosions. They gathered in the 9th compartment, the far rear of the vessel. With the power gone, they had only flashlights and a few emergency oxygen candles. Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov wrote a note to his wife and to the Navy. In it, he recorded the situation. All the crew from sections 6, 7, and 8 went over to the 9th. There are 23 people here. We made this decision as a result of the accident. None of us can get to the surface. He signed it with the time, 13:15, nearly 2 hours after the first blast. The men tried to survive in total darkness as temperatures fell close to freezing. They attempted to conserve oxygen while also burning oxygen candles. One of the candles malfunctioned and exploded, releasing toxic gases and worsening the already poor air. Above them, the Russian Navy attempted rescue operations, but bad weather and technical failures slowed progress. Foreign offers of help were at first refused. For several days, Norwegian and British rescue teams waited for permission to assist. When they finally reached the submarine a week later and opened the hatch, it was too late. The bodies of the 23 men were recovered from the 9th compartment. Kolesnikov's note confirmed that they had lived for hours after the initial disaster, long enough to understand their situation and to record their final words. In the end, all 118 men aboard Kursk died. The napalm training incident. Napalm became one of the most infamous weapons of the 20th century. A thickened gasoline that clung to everything it touched, it burned at temperatures over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. During the Vietnam War era, the U.S. military used it extensively in combat, and also in training exercises on bases across the United States. In one of those training sessions, a live demonstration went wrong. A group of soldiers was practicing with napalm canisters, preparing for its use in combat. When the weapon ignited, one of the men was caught in the blast. Burning gel splattered over his uniform and skin. Unlike ordinary fire, napalm could not simply be brushed off or smothered. It stuck and continued to burn, eating through fabric and flesh. Eyewitnesses later described the scene as unbearable. Medics rushed to the soldier and tried everything they could. They cut away his clothing, poured water over his body, and attempted to scrape off the burning gel. But the chemical compound was designed to keep burning. Every movement, every attempt to remove it, tore away more skin. The man was still conscious as they carried him to the medical tent. He screamed in agony as the burns spread. Doctors later noted that the injuries covered most of his body. Even with morphine, the pain was overwhelming. The gel had sunk deep, fusing with his skin. Despite hours of emergency treatment, his body could not recover. He survived long enough for his fellow soldiers to realize that nothing could save him. The burns were too deep, and infection began almost immediately. By the end of the day, he succumbed to his injuries. Military reports reduced the incident to a training accident, but for those who witnessed it, the memory never faded. Unlike most battlefield weapons, napalm left no escape once it touched the human body. The accident showed in brutal clarity why it had become one of the most feared weapons of war. A single mistake in training had cost a man his life in one of the most excruciating ways imaginable. The bunker incident. In 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, U.S. forces used dozens of hastily built bunkers and reinforced shelters around Baghdad. These structures, made of concrete slabs and sandbags, were meant to provide protection from mortar fire and airstrikes. But under the stress of explosions, they could just as easily become traps. One such bunker was being used as a forward operating shelter for soldiers resting between patrols. The roof was a heavy layer of concrete, supported by simple steel beams. When nearby shelling shook the ground, the structure collapsed without warning. Several men were inside when the ceiling collapsed. Most managed to scramble out, coughing through dust and debris. But one soldier was pinned beneath a slab that weighed several tons. His legs and chest were trapped under the concrete, leaving him unable to move. Rescue efforts began immediately. His comrades tried to shift the debris by hand, then with tools. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The trapped soldier was conscious, speaking to them, urging them to hurry. Medics reached him and worked to stop his bleeding, but the pressure of the slab made it impossible to free him quickly. Hours passed. Engineers brought equipment to lift the concrete, but every attempt risked the slab shifting and crushing him completely. The soldier remained alert, slipping in and out of consciousness. His fellow soldiers later said the hardest part was hearing him speak, knowing he was aware of his situation, but unable to escape. Despite continuous efforts, the rescue took too long. Internal injuries and blood loss worsened with every minute. Eventually, his voice grew weaker. By the time they managed to shift enough debris to reach him fully, it was too late. He had died still trapped under the concrete. The S-178 submarine incident. On October 21, 1981, the Soviet submarine S-178 was returning from training exercises in the Sea of Japan. The diesel-powered submarine was moving on the surface at night, only a few miles from Vladivostok. At 7:46 p.m., the refrigerated cargo ship RFS-13 struck the submarine on its port side. The impact tore a hole in the hull near the forward compartments. Water rushed in immediately. Within minutes, the S-178 began to sink. Some of the crew managed to escape into the water before the submarine went down. Others sealed themselves into the central compartments as watertight doors were closed. In total, 32 men were trapped inside the submarine when it came to rest on the seabed, about 108 feet below the surface. The men in the control room and engine section had little light and limited air. They knocked on the hull with tools, sending out SOS signals in the hope that rescuers above would hear them. Divers later confirmed that the knocking sounds were received. Rescue operations began the next day. Divers brought air hoses and tried to attach rescue equipment, but poor visibility and strong currents slowed progress. The trapped men rationed their oxygen, but carbon dioxide began to build up. Several sailors attempted to escape using breathing gear. Some made it to the surface and survived, but others lost consciousness during the ascent and drowned. Those who remained inside grew weaker as time passed. After 2 days, divers managed to reach the submarine and open hatches. They evacuated survivors from the aft compartments one by one. In the end, 27 men were saved. 5 others, who had been trapped in the flooded forward sections, did not make it out. The S-178 was later raised and examined. Investigators confirmed that most of the men who died had been alive for hours after the collision, but were cut off from escape. Their attempts to signal and their use of limited oxygen equipment were documented in Soviet naval reports. The Grenade Incident. On June 19, 1959, at Fort Dix, New Jersey, a group of young Army recruits lined up on the grenade range. It was one of the most dangerous parts of their training. Each man would step into a sandbagged pit, pull the pin on a live fragmentation grenade, throw it, and then duck for cover. The supervising instructor that day was Sergeant First Class John R. Rice, a veteran with years of service. His job was to stand next to each recruit, guide them through the process, and make sure no mistakes were made. But mistakes could happen in an instant. One of the recruits pulled the pin from his grenade. Instead of throwing it properly over the wall, he froze. The live grenade slipped from his hand and dropped to the ground inside the pit. The fuse was already burning. In less than 5 seconds, the grenade would detonate. There was no time to think, no time to run. Sergeant Rice reacted immediately. He shoved the recruit toward the corner of the pit, away from the grenade. Then, without hesitation, he threw himself onto it. The explosion tore through the pit, killing Rice instantly. The recruit survived, shielded by the instructor's body. So did the other men nearby. Word of the incident spread quickly across the base. The Army later confirmed the details in its investigation. Rice's act was not a mistake, not an accident. It was a deliberate decision in the split second before detonation. His body absorbed the blast, sparing the others. Sergeant First Class John R. Rice was posthumously commended for his sacrifice. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions.
I don't understand how that mistake happens, bro. Like, the people that be throwing the grenades, bro, that shit slip or something like that, bro. I can't understand that, bro. Like, genuinely. That shit kind of pissed me off, bro. Rest in peace, John R. Rice, bro. I can't understand how that happens, bro. Like, that's a different level of not locked in, bro. Like, that's That's terrible, bro. W video, bro. Rest in peace to all them. That's terrible ways to go out, bro. Especially because majority were mistakes, bro. Going out because of somebody else's mistake is crazy, bro. Rest in peace, bro.